What happens when a government agency decides that court orders don't matter? That's not just a dramatic question, it's the heart of a battle playing out inside Congress, and it exposes something much bigger than politics. It's about whether the Constitution, the foundation of American democracy, still holds real power, or whether government leaders can simply choose when to follow it. That question came front and center when Representative Shri Thanidar went head-to-head with Secretary Kristi Noem. At first glance, it looked like another tense exchange in a committee hearing. But listen closely and you'll realize this wasn't routine oversight. It was a clash about the survival of checks and balances, a test of whether the government still answers to the law, or whether the law itself is becoming optional for those in power. Thanidar set the tone immediately.
Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission and am in support of the budget here, and I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status, the Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected, therefore it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation, and you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, but you just said you're not investigating.
No, you and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me
I'm
close
doing.
with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Senator Murkowski.
He reminded Noam, and by extension the Department of Homeland Security, of something every official swears: the oath of office. To uphold the Constitution of the United States. Not to uphold party politics, not to protect an administration, not to defend power for its own sake, but to serve the Constitution and the people. That oath exists because the Constitution designed a system of three branches. Congress makes the laws, the President enforces them, the judiciary interprets them. That balance is not symbolic, it's the very mechanism that guards liberty. And when one branch ignores the other, when the executive shrugs at the judiciary, history shows us the consequences are never small. Democracies do not collapse overnight. They collapse when one branch quietly begins to claim authority over the rest. So Thanidar asked the obvious but essential question: does the Department of Homeland Security follow federal court orders? A yes or no question. And Noam, without hesitation, said yes. She repeated it. She insisted they follow every order. On the surface it sounded reassuring. But Thanidar didn't stop there. He brought receipts. He cited an example that shredded her claim. FEMA, which operates under DHS authority, had been ordered by a federal judge to release disaster relief funds immediately. Not eventually. Not after review. Immediately. The order was clear, written in black and white, and yet FEMA failed to comply. The agency dragged its feet, withholding funds in direct violation of that ruling. That's when the contradictions became undeniable. Either DHS leadership ignored the judiciary outright, or they lost control of their own agencies. Neither answer looks good. Both options mean one thing: the Constitution was brushed aside. And Thanidar's words cut deeper than any statistic could. We all took an oath to uphold the Constitution. It is a sad day that I have to sit here and issue a reminder. Think about that. A member of Congress reminding a cabinet secretary of her sworn duty. That isn't business as usual. That's a red flashing alarm. But why does this one fight matter so much? Because the consequences ripple outward. If FEMA can ignore a court ruling on disaster funding, what's to stop other agencies from ignoring rulings on civil rights, on voting access, on healthcare protections, or environmental safeguards? Once government leaders treat court rulings as optional, the entire system of checks and balances begins to unravel. This is not just a bureaucratic squabble, it's about whether the rule of law still binds the executive branch. And when that chain snaps, history tells us exactly what comes next: concentrated power, lost freedoms, creeping authoritarianism. Thanidar's challenge was more than political theater, it was a line in the sand, a warning about how fragile democracy becomes when leaders dismiss the judiciary. And here's the part that should make you stop and think this isn't abstract. It's not just Washington insiders clashing in hearing rooms. It's about you. Imagine your community hit by a hurricane or wildfire. A court orders FEMA to release relief funds, and your town is counting on that money to rebuild schools, homes, and hospitals. But what if FEMA shrugs and delays, deciding it knows better than the courts? What if the aid never comes? That's not a distant worry, that's exactly what Thanidar exposed. Once agencies start ignoring judges, ordinary citizens lose their last shield. Courts are the place you turn when your rights are threatened, when government oversteps, when injustice needs correcting. If that shield is cracked, your protections vanish. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or Independent, your rights depend on courts being respected. Thanidar pressed this point with precision. He wasn't arguing about a single program or a single grant, he was demanding accountability. He was saying that if the Constitution means anything at all, then no agency, no secretary, no administration can place itself above the law. And in that moment he reminded Americans of a simple truth: once accountability becomes optional, democracy itself is on borrowed time. Now some defenders of DHS tried to spin the FEMA example. They claimed the funds were being re-evaluated, that processes were still underway. But that argument dodges the core fact: a federal judge had issued a direct order. And when agencies delay, stall, or reinterpret clear rulings, they're not just playing with paperwork, they're undermining the authority of the judiciary itself. And that's the bigger picture. Because the issue isn't just one agency or one secretary, it's the precedent. If FEMA can ignore a court order, what message does that send to the rest of government? What happens the next time a ruling protects civil liberties, voting rights, or free speech, and the executive branch simply decides it doesn't feel like complying? If courts can be sidelined, then no law, no ruling, no right is truly safe. This is how democracy erodes, not in a single collapse, but in small dismissals of accountability that pile up until checks and balances are nothing more than words in a textbook. And that's what made Thanidar's persistence so important. He forced the record to reflect what was really happening. He refused to let Noam hide behind easy assurances. He reminded the American people that defending the Constitution is not optional. And this brings us back to you. Because what's at stake isn't just a congressional hearing, it's your future. It's your disaster aid, your health care, your community funding, your civil rights. If government agencies can pick and choose which court orders they follow, then citizens are left defenseless. The last line of accountability disappears. And when accountability dies in silence, democracy doesn't last long after. That's why Thanidar's words should echo beyond Capitol Hill. They're not just a reminder to one secretary. They're a reminder to every American that vigilance matters. That democracy isn't self-sustaining. It survives only if the people insist on it, only if the people demand that leaders respect the rule of law. Because the Constitution is not a suggestion, it is the supreme law of the land. It doesn't belong to presidents or cabinet secretaries. It belongs to the people. And when officials try to treat it as optional, it's up to the people to push back, to speak up, to refuse to look away. So don't treat this as just another heated exchange in Congress. Treat it as a wake-up call. If FEMA can ignore a judge in Washington, then tomorrow it could be your community left without relief, your rights left without protection, your voice left without power. This story is not about headlines, it's about the foundation of liberty itself, and that's why this moment matters so much. Because when Thanidar pressed Noam, he wasn't just scoring political points, he was reminding America that accountability cannot survive if we're willing to look the other way. He was saying that the oath to uphold the Constitution must still mean something, and that every official, no matter how high their office, must answer to the law. If you believe that no agency, no secretary, no president should be above the Constitution, then this is the time to stay engaged. Share this story, keep the pressure on. Let those in power know that Americans are watching. Because the day the courts can be ignored without consequence is the day democracy itself starts to slip away. And if you care about protecting the Constitution, if you care about keeping accountability alive, then don't just watch and move on. Make your voice part of the record. Because the Constitution doesn't defend itself, it relies on all of us to defend it. And if we fail to demand that leaders respect the rule of law, we may wake up to find that the law no longer protects us at all.